Hi, Florian. Thanks so much for taking the time to share a few thoughts on the future of pipeline generation. What will change? What remains the same? What is still dead or not dead, as all the LinkedIn posts suggest. Maybe if you can share a few thoughts first of who are you, why are you qualified to speak about this topic, including the books you wrote, and what's actually one go-to-market belief that you have that many people disagree with you.
Yeah, thanks, Manuel. Thanks for having me. Happy to share a few things where I'm coming from. So, business background, started business, then joined Angel Investor Club for a few years while being a student. So, a lot of deal flows, a lot of business models. Then joined a small venture firm. So, we invest basically a large business angel who did a lot of investments, and I joined as an associate. And then what we've always seen, startups and companies we've invested in, mainly out of ETH, EPFL, and TU Munich, they did great tech, coded really well, but they did not match that up in their GTM and sales capabilities. And that's when I joined SalesPlaybook. And for the last 4 years, building pipeline generation systems, wrote 2 books, one on Outbound, one generic, more general on B2B pipeline generation, and served with my team, I think 50 to 75 customers over specifically the last 3 years, specifically in pipeline generation. Yes. So one thing that's a bit controversial or nuanced, I think what you often read out there is something like, yeah, outbound is dead and stuff like that. Please, everybody who tells that, go on telling. And we continue to make our customers successful with outbound. I love the guys who spread that message. Yeah, it got harder, right? Indeed. But still, for some owners and for some industries, it's working exceptionally well. Especially, I think during the last few months, there has been also a surge in cold calling, because people, they so rarely get actually a cold call, including me on my profile on LinkedIn is still COO. I think that's somebody you could call from time to time. I hardly ever get a call, and if I get a good one, I actually, because I feel with the person calling, right? Part of what SalesPlaybook is all about, cold outreach. I pick it up, and if they're doing a good job, I sometimes even join and hop on a call with them.
Yeah, exactly with you on this. One person even called me with a wrong name. They called me like, "Hi, is this Thomas Handel from top here?" I was like, "No, what? He's a client of us, and I love the guy. I'm not Thomas Handel. I'm Manuel Hartmann. But how can I help you?" I was like, "Well, do you have a ticket for Bits and Pretzels?" I was like, "No, but I know the conference. So being aware of what the company of the person calling does, and like if it's relevant for you, like helps a ton in awareness and education. Like, that's where inbound outbound go together." And then she sent me an email. "Hi Thomas, here's a link to buy a ticket and spend $1,000 with me." I was like, "You still didn't figure out personalization, but you figured out relevance, and you had the right trigger, and you actually picked up the phone to call me." And now, like, I had the first experience with iOS 26 where somebody wrote me like, "Can you please implement HubSpot for us?" And I called and was like, "Hi, please state your name and intent. And if you do it not well, if you do outbound wrong, like you will just like be blocked earlier on all channels." That's something that I see as well. How do you see?
Yeah, let me chip in here a second thing that just came to mind, which I do believe in, and many absolutely don't believe in. I think AI outbound, AI is calling you, not today, not tomorrow, but in 5 to 10 years. And for me, already today is going to be the preferred way how you're going to be contacted, right? If it's relevant, if it's based on a few signals, I'd much rather ask the AI who learned everything about the product, has the case studies already, knows the details, how this thing integrates with my system, and so on. So I can speak to a very, very senior person right on the first call because they learned all there is about it, and I can go into the details. Right? There's this whole thing about, you need to build trust, and people are not ready for it, but it's coming. It's coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but I'd much rather prefer it personally already today.
Yeah, no, I think that's for many true, and it's already happens as convergence of sales, service, and support in e-commerce, where like, hey, I bought this shoe, size 42, it's too small for me. Can I send it back? Can I have a new one? And can you give me a discount? And you don't want to open a sales ticket, a service ticket, and support ticket. You just want to get shoes that fit your feet. So like small average contract values, that's already happening. And I think that this is also where what we're going to talk about here today is becoming more relevant, right? You mentioned in our briefing that there's 4 ways to grow revenue in terms of pipeline generation. There's new logo pipeline generation, so you win new clients, new customers that become aware of it. Like, what's the lead velocity rate? There's pipeline conversion, how much of that actually converts. And anytime a lead gen agency reaches out to me and I was like, we generated 1 million in pipeline, I was like, waited, and how much of it actually became money? And then they typically go silent. So what's sales velocity and conversion and deal size? And then customer base growth, like how do you do pipeline generation for people who already purchased from you once? And then what's the sales efficiency? How can you do more with less through smartest processes and systems? So how can you increase sales efficiency, not scale through more headcount and people, but process? So can you share a bit more about pipeline generation here? What are 3 things that you see across these 50 to 75 clients after writing 2 books really in depth that you see regularly of like what people should do first before they buy expensive tools and hire more people?
Yeah, happy to give like a rapid fire answer here and then deep dive on each of them. The first one is your GTM motion matters, meaning the ACV, annual contract value, and how many deals you sell per year or win per year is very important because it determines what type of go-to-market motion is most effective. What do I mean with that? If you sell, for example, you tier out mainframe servers, you need different talent. You go through a very long sales cycle very often. It's a fundamental change in the company. You sell, 7 digits typically. It's a huge transformation project compared to you have some tool that is product-led growth, right? Which you can just plug and play and it adds value. Yeah. So the talent you need is fundamentally different, right? In the high touch or dedicated touch motion where you tier out the mainframe servers, you have a few accounts, you have very, very top-notch account executives that know the industry, that have a long breath, I mean, it's a different type of talent than when you have a low-touch motion where you have much more transactional sales, and that's a quick win. You have to take that into account. Your GTM motion also then impacts your outbound motion or your marketing and sales motion, right? In terms of, okay, if you go high touch, dedicated touch, that motion is much more driven by network, brand, your expertise, and so on, and C-level, CXO, intros, and what have you not. Whereas the low touch motion is much more driven by word of mouth, the features, how do they adopt the product, how usable it is, and so on, right? And that's a different outbound motion, right? Let's dive deeper on that a little bit later. And if you have a different motion, right, you have different tooling landscape very often that you need to implement. So that's the third thing within go-to-market motions. Then a second quick win is, here it depends on go-to-market motion again, but if you have low mid-touch motion and you need to do a lot of outreach, a lot of enrichment, lead lists, signal-based stuff, so you need to automate a lot, that's a different skill set than people actually having the conversation. They're building relationships, they're very good in listening, handling concerns, and so on. That's a different skill set than building, enriching leads, and building that system in the background. So that is something I would centralize. Doesn't make sense that 10 account executives and SDRs build their own systems, build their own lists, and so on. And last but not least, I think what's always a quick win is, if you're not active on LinkedIn, start connecting with your ideal customer profiles on LinkedIn. Connect with them, start posting content so that they get some exposure to your content and start building brand.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's even like not only more efficient to centralize lead identification, sourcing, enrichment, outreach, but it's also less risky to protect the brand because otherwise you got maybe even like three people writing to the same person. Everybody runs their own script. Somebody pitches an AI first solution. The other one fixes how to retain top talent. And the third one mentions customer logos. And the market is small enough, especially mid and high touch, for people to talk to each other. And like if they get a very different appearance of your brand, of your company, of your narrative, it just leads to confusion, and clarity drives trust and predictability, and confusion drives mistrust actually. And that drives down sales velocity and conversion and deal size and revenue. So one thing I loved about your briefing part, right? Like usually when you talk about pipeline generation, people are always asking like more leads, cold outreach, how can I set up more rotating inboxes to spam more people with email? You actually put leverage existing customer relationships first. And it's not just about new logos. And I agree with you that some of the biggest opportunities might be with existing customers or even prospects. Like you close lost pipeline and people already know you, they know the use case. You had existing conversations before. With your existing customers, they probably know more of your ideal customer profile conversation. So can you share a bit more about the pipeline sources from existing customers around existing relationship-based and closed lost resurrection pipeline?
Yeah, happy to. I think one fundamental, and that ties again into the talent discussion. One fundamental challenge is that once you onboarded the customer, they are handed over to the customer success team. Customer success people, they operate differently. They're differently incentivized. They're there to very often, I think it's changing now, right? We see more and more a client of ours who put an emphasis that the customer success role has also responsibility to generate referrals and business within the account. But it's very tough because they're driven by making the customer happy and deliver what has been promised. So I think that's a huge lever you have, right? Upsells, cross sells, expansion to new departments with existing customers, but you need somebody to take accountability. The same is for getting referrals from existing customers that are super happy and monitor when they change jobs. So what we typically do is we started that a while ago and it's quite successful. We monitor stakeholders within our clients' customer base. And once they change jobs, high-level decision makers change jobs less regularly, right? So you need quite a volume of your total addressable market of stakeholders, right? But when they change jobs, you reach out if it's relevant, right? If they change jobs to a company that is also in your total addressable market, it's a perfect way in. And that happens. And that's such an easy way in because often if C-level change jobs, they go into new company that is similar industry very often, and they're expected to bring innovation. They're expected to bring change, not just maintain status quo. And they know your product already. So I think that's an under-leveraged way.
I completely agree. And I think one challenge here is language and identity as well. Language in terms of people talk still about lead generation. Can you give me 1,000 more leads? And they mean like 1,000 new email addresses, whatever you do. I was like once with a co-op petition, a player, so to say, in a workshop, and I went in and was like, hey, let's talk about how we generate sales pipeline as in future revenue, as in future cash. And his headline was how he generated 6,000 leads in like a week. And it basically showed like a Fiverr workflow of like 6,000 email addresses. For me, a lead was always like a potential future customer if you do the job right and if like things play out. And the other one is that people basically like, look, I closed the logo, I'm done. Like sales is always be closing and then run away, like in a very traditional sense of like coming from the Oracle days of like the difference between Larry Ellison and God, like the founder of Oracle. God doesn't believe he's Larry Ellison. And it still has this reputation of like lead gen is about new stuff all the time. How do you see that changing and also customer success becoming more of a revenue generating role without abandoning true customer success. That's a concern, right? That customer success was service and support, and now it's salespeople in disguise.
Yeah, fundamentally, there is maybe a small conflict of interest. On the one hand, you want to make your customer hugely successful. On the other hand, you want also to sell the person something. Shouldn't be a conflict of interest, but maybe it's perceived by the person as such, because they're not used to sell. They're not used to ask for a referral, ask for a testimonial, and so on. Right? They don't see it as part of their job.
And it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's very uncomfortable.
Because customer success people are used to give. They are paid to give value, and suddenly they ask for value, and it's other way around, right?
So I think what you can try, right, is incentivize them for case studies and for referrals, or you bring in the commercial lead who is there in the QBRs and has this role of generating more pipeline with existing customers.
Yeah, that's the most successful way I've seen that working. Usually that customer success is not the bad function who asks for money, but they set the trigger, they understand the use case, and they schedule a call with the bad person who needs money, and they remain the good call. That's just helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like also in our team, like if a consultant comes like, yeah, I see what you mean. I see you also need HubSpot, not only like LinkedIn brand building and signal-based outbound with Play. Let me schedule a call with Eric Steffen, who knows HubSpot really well, who can help you with that. He will eventually ask you for money if you full on need to implement it, but he's going to be helpful for that. I'm just here to help. I'm not asking you for money. I'm never going to send you a quote with a dollar, Swiss franc, euro amount.
Yeah, and I think many people have that, right? Not just salespeople, but also not just customer success people, but also consultants, right? For example, in my role, I had a client. He wasn't paying the invoice on time. So I'm consultant there, but as well in my role as CFO, I have to remind him to pay the invoice. Guess what? Did I do that? How I did it typically with clients that don't pay on time? No, I asked my or our accountant to do that for me.
After me, I remember.
Yes,
I remember it's like, Flo, what happened to you? Did you become soft? Like, no, I become consultant head and CFO head. It's uncomfortable because I have two heads. It's a bit schizophrenic, right? Because you're value providing and you're value capturing, and it's not the same thing.
Absolutely.
One more point that I found interesting when you mentioned like close lost resurrection, right? Not now becomes ready now because of deals that you did not lose because you fundamentally the wrong fit, but they said like, hey, look, we're still in a competitive contract. We on an annual agreement with Salesforce, or we're working with this agency, and you have a trigger, you have a signal that this previous blocker is now removed. How do you see closed lost pipeline becoming new sales pipeline again?
Yeah. So what's closed lost pipeline ideally? It's people you talk to and you had a good conversation. Maybe you even did some consulting as part, consultative selling. So you left a good impression overall. But for some reason, the deal did not happen, right? The current setup was fine. The deal's too small for your solution. It's not a priority this year. Some industry change, some legal, whatever came up, right? But the good thing is, ideally, you have a warm relationship because you provided them some value. And you can leverage this relationship from time to time, reach out, and don't forget about them. Keep them in the loop. Reach out to them. Hey, how are you doing? How is it going with the other vendor you chose last year? Are you happy? Shall we start again a conversation? And don't just let them, because they said once no. You can check in with them a year later. Things change within the company, people change within the company, decision makers change, and so on. And I think that's something that ties in to another topic that is very important, which is about some companies, when you do pipeline generation, especially for new logos, they're not in market today. They're out of market, right? So picture there are 100 potential customers. On any given day, 95 of them, they're not ready. They're not ready to buy because they're out of market at the moment. They just bought a solution they have no budget, whatever. But the important point here is that you still have a conversation with them, that you still build trust with them. The problem is that most companies, they target only the 5% that are ready to buy.
Yeah. That's lead generation, right? That's hunting SQLs, like buy now, book a call, buy something from me this week.
Yes, and they overlook the 95% who aren't. But when those prospects enter the market, they choose familiar brands, trusted brands, people they had exposure to before. So you want to nurture, you want to do marketing now in B2B SaaS, and so they call it just demand generation. It's marketing. You want to market, nurture to them, right?
There's
In simple
so much
speak.
fancy language in marketing around that, like how to convert the MQL to the lead scoring to the SQL, demand gen and demand capturing and so on. I mean, in the end, it's how can you generate and scale awareness, trust, and education so you don't need to explain everything one-to-one in a frankly expensive sales call.
Absolutely.
You cannot have like 95, like 100 conversations and 5 people could buy and only 2 of them close. Your conversion rate is like 100 conversations times 2 because you need like a first call and a decision call. If 200 calls to win 2 logos is not exactly feasible in today's market environment, should never be. But how can you scale awareness and trust? And I think one part there is to really invest into brand building on a human level as well. And people ask that all day. It's like, hey, LinkedIn is not working for me. And this is like if somebody would say sport is not working for me. Like, well, what did you do? Like, well, I've been running around like crazy and I went to the gym and I tried every machine once. So you didn't do one thing specifically well. And when people say like LinkedIn doesn't work for me, they typically mean like I tried emails, I tried paid ads, I did a lot of content from the company page, and it doesn't work because I have like this, as like the CEO of HubSpot literally has like 100 times more reach from her personal profile than the whole HubSpot page with 1 million plus subscribers to the HubSpot page. And the HubSpot page with 1 million subscribers maybe does 100 engagements. Yamini Rangan's supposed to like 1,000 plus. But at the same time investment, how do you see LinkedIn brand building impacting trust and awareness and staying top of mind of these not right now in market buyers?
It depends. If you're now, let's be very specific and give a lot of context, because often what you read on LinkedIn is, okay, I booked hundreds calls this week from LinkedIn, each 15 minutes in my calendar. But if you only have 200 named accounts, well, good luck with that. So I think it's important, right, that your target group is on LinkedIn. I mean, we have clients, their target group is not on LinkedIn, right? They're not hanging out there. You get them on the phone, you get them with other channels. But given that your target group is on LinkedIn, where we have been hugely successful with mid and high touch sales market motions, is generating content for the founder. Specifically, you can also do it yourself, that resonates with the target audience. And then it's not only about, it's not only about how I see it, but also what we're doing, right? A little bit. It's not only about posting the very technical stuff, but it's on all levels, right? So top funnel, mid funnel, and when they're ready to buy, basically you go more tactical. And what is it now that is in there? So you position yourself and ideally your team as thought leaders in the industry, and that goes together with connecting to ideal customer profiles, ideally in an automated fashion, right? And then once they start to engage, once they visit your LinkedIn profile, engage with your content, and they visit your website, you see, there seems to be some intent. Let's actually reach out and find out, right? And typically you can do that very low key, so that you engage with my content. What resonated? Shall we have a conversation?
Yeah, like the sell by chat in a non-salesy way, right? It's like, hey, look, like worth having a chat about what we just chatted about in the LinkedIn comment section. I think this is so important.
Back to your question, right? How do you build trust? For some customers, for some businesses, LinkedIn may be the right channel, but for example, what we did once was organizing much more high-end event where we got CEOs and so on to sign up and join for a specific customer of ours. And this is not on LinkedIn, right? You maybe reach out by LinkedIn and say, hey, we have CEOs in that industry, that region joining the event. Are you on a roundtable discussion? And that's a lot of value. But that's not something you can do in a low touch, mid touch market motion. That's much more a high touch, dedicated touch market motion because you invest a lot of resources per person that is joining the event.
I agree. And you speak a lot about mid touch and high touch and so on. Like, I mean, medium touch typically being like annual contract values of 15,000 to 50,000 US dollars, euros, Swiss francs, whatever your currency is, and high touch typically being 50K to 250K or 500,000 even per year that somebody invests. And that like the high touch by nature, you have less businesses that can invest, that can give you 500,000. It's typically 500 to 5,000, where people, brand, expertise, relationships, what you just mentioned matter a lot more than like discounts and like nearly e-commerce style settings where you have like a no touch, no human ever speaks to the person, self-service versus low touch. It's simply not profitable to run these motions, right? Can you get a bit more concrete on like what do you recommend as a low touch engagement? So if your annual contract value is below 10,000 euros, what do you do at mid touch and what do you do at high touch? Like how does it differ and what are specific tactics that you would recommend?
I mean, generally, right, you spend for the lower touch, you spend less resources per lead or per deal, so to speak, and you have more one-to-many one-to-many conversations. Whereas for dedicated touch, it's reverse. That's the fundamentals. So now for low touch, I'm not really an expert, right? Because that's not what we are doing with SalesPlaybook. But I see their awareness campaigns, paid ads working well, content, blog posts, community resources, community building, online communities, and so on. I mean, one tool that I'm using is Play.com. It's product-led growth and community-led growth, right? They're doing an amazing job. They have huge Slack community. People help each other using the tool, and they have also great referral engines. So they do a lot of events around the globe. There's a lot of community. That's something that can work, right? In the low touch. That's not my expertise at all, but that's what I've seen. Then for mid touch, it's a lot around educational resources. So in-depth materials such as white papers, webinars, sometimes even, events, on-site events. Depends a little bit, but I've seen that working. Going to on-site events if you're the type of founder, account executive that can establish relationships on these events. And then outbound based on triggers. So if people start to visit your website, visit the pricing page, you send the bot researching their website, their business, and you ship a very, very, very personalized email that is relevant. Relevance is always more important than the personalization and the details. Or I shouldn't come across that it's written by an agent. And then what else? Focus on the follow-ups, right? So you need to follow up there in the sense that once you reached out, you engage again, you nurture again, and take into consideration the whole in-market, out-market dynamic, what I described above. And then high touch and dedicated touch, right, it's much more about these exclusive offerings, as I described as well, right? Super exclusive events and executive engagement. Get your board involved to establish a relationship with your C-level, build a brand. I think that are things that work with high and dedicated touch.
Yeah, 100% agree on all the points you made. One point maybe to emphasize or to ask, like, if you share that point of view, is like that brand is increasing in importance as it becomes easier to build features and it becomes easier to connect with people. So while people have been mainly buying products in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you needed to speak to a salesperson to understand the product, it was basically a product explainer person. It became easier with the internet for people to understand what a product does, and you buy the things with the most features. And it has become easier with Gen AI to build features. So there's feature parity for many solutions. Like in most educated markets, there's probably 3 to 5 solutions that do roughly the same thing. I guess there's like a dozen cold email softwares we've tried at SalesPlaybook, and there's probably like 10x as many. And all send emails and rotating inbox and so on. So if you end up with Smart Lead or Lemlist or Instantly or Reply.io, is not that much depend on the feature selection, but it's also, do you like them? Do you trust them? Do you know them well enough to use them? So I would make that's one belief I have, that many people disagree with me, that brand is important no matter what your annual contract value is, but how you play the brand and where you show up and how much you can invest in it is different. So for example, if you have a LinkedIn post or like an Instagram post for a nearly consumer brand, like a 1 to 5K investment, you need that volume of people going to the shopping cart and having a Black Friday promotion nearly. When we had clients in like enterprise go to market, the post only had like 12 likes, and I felt bad for them. And they messaged me like, that's amazing. Like, we had one positive reply where someone's like, could we have a conversation about this? Which is like 6-figure weight the pipeline for them, because if they close the deal, it's 7 figures. So the leverage you get from the brand and engagement is just drastically different. And you need to care more about effectiveness, doing the things right and the right things versus how efficient they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe speaking about the future of these things a bit. I mean, there's so much you can do now. Like, you can do deepfake videos pretty much. Like, I can record a video once and say like, hi Flo, and then I can say hi Diego, hi Aaron, hi Trimpy, and I can record the same video, but then it's suggesting it's authentic, but I actually scale it up. Like for voice messages, that's like pretty standard integration in outbound email tools now, on LinkedIn tools now. But then I suggest it's personnel. It's literally me doing that versus it's an engine doing. How do you see that impacting trust in outbound in general? And I had a serious conversation with like a Silicon Valley expert on that, like that even email might lose credibility as a communication channel, but it's too important not to work. So we need to figure it out. Like, how do you see trust evaporating with the automation and AI that's indistinguishable if it's done by a human? Or
need to give it some thought, right? I mean, look, the obvious answer is, right, if it's coming across as, and I'm speaking for now and the next 6 months or 12 months, because things are evolving very quickly. As for now, in my inbox, I can very quickly detect whether this is written by some AI and it's not relevant, versus it's written by a human or somebody who actually is top 5% in programmatic outbound using AI tools and stuff like that. Yes, I don't, and that's my perspective. I think most of our clients' perspective, as long as the email is relevant and it's well researched and it doesn't come across as an AI generated message, you're good to go. Once everybody is writing such emails, that's probably 6 to 12 months out, maybe more, I don't know, then it's becoming a problem.
I think it's just diminishing returns on everything that works will be worked, and if it gets worked, it works less, which will be more volume, which makes it work less, and it's diminishing returns. And I still have like 150 minutes like sales comedy podcast with Trimpy that we need to publish, where I was like, hey, is quick question still a valid subject line? No one, you need to write a long question now and then write the short one. Do you want to give me money? And it increases reply rate by 35%. Now it's 4% negative reply instead of 3%. And we joked about this in two ways. Like, first, it was working 2018 to 21 roughly, like, because probably contributed to that, to popularizing that template and quick question and like how to write a cold email, and it works less now. And the second, because it's still so real. because still people templatize so much and they pseudo personalize so much. And there's a subject line called Florian CFO SalesPlaybook, quick question. And it's ridiculous by now because it's so overused. But you also mentioned an interesting point in the introduction where you said like, hey, look, I actually would like to be called by an AI as long as it's done right, as long as the person is more helpful to me, as long as it's more relevant. I don't care if it's a human being. I just want to solve a problem as a buyer. And I don't care if it's solved by AI or human interface. One interesting point where I'd love to get your take from Jason Lemkin is that like it often breaks at the intersection, at the handover points. It's like, hey, you got an amazing email by an AI. And the AI said like, hey, Jason, congrats so much to publishing 797 Saucer episodes, lastly with these 3 guests, and we could take over the full podcast production for you. I'm like, yes, great, please let me give you money. And then it took 3 days for a human being to send the scheduling link with the question, oh, what does your podcast do and how many episodes do you have? Go to the website and your AI actually knows, and they told me what I do and it was valid. So the human messes up the top 5% by AI. And we've experienced that where we set up outbound campaigns by email, by LinkedIn, and clients told us like, yeah, but I don't get booked calls. And it's like, well, how did the conversation go with the chief information officer who gave you their mobile number, their budget, and their champion who would implement it, and 2 time slots? It's like, oh, I was too busy to send out an invite. So how do you see this handover point between artificial intelligence and human intelligence being messed up, and what does it need to be fixed?
Well, I mean, first of all, these things happen if people are not properly trained, they lack context. But that's nothing that should happen, that you have to restate what the AI already wrote. And that's a training topic. Then I just had a good thought. Let me give a few seconds. You can cut that out anyway. And then the second thing is, these things, right, in future are going to be automated. If it's just about scheduling and sending through a sketching link, that's a perfect task for an AI. That's already done nowadays. I don't think that's a future concern to mess up. But in future, if the AI is better, why would you talk to a human other than, okay, I want to see whether this is real? But things are developing so quickly in that space that in the near future, maybe it's just more efficient and even more effective to have a bunch of AIs talking to each other, right? I know, there's a lot of hype around these topics, and I think it's overestimated what happens during the next 1 year, but underestimated what's going to happen during the next 10 years, right? Gartner, hype cycle, and stuff like that.
I think
that's my take on it.
There's also, and maybe a lot of people disagree with me here on these 2 things, that authenticity is one of the key traits if you will sell more in the future, if marketing will become better. So when you just said you can cut that out anyways, I can, but it's also proving that we're recording this live in my garden here at your home, and it's not a podcast generated by 2 avatars talking to each other. And there's a difference between Homo sapiens and 1,000-year-old hardware. I mean, once, like when one of our consultants told me, like, I went to OMR festival and I had a bottle of wine with a client. Like, well, why were you not hunting new leads? Like, well, that's stupid behavior, because that's actually an AI cannot have a bottle of wine with you. Like, it's hard. Exactly. You can put up a screen and drink for yourself, but that's not what we engineered to do. And the second part is probably the future is already here. It's just not distributed well. So what I see in some parts of the world, we're still in our very bubble, right? We're having this internal conversation like, are we like top 5 to 10% in clay in Europe? This and this person is better. Like, okay, fine. But there's like 50 people in all of Europe that are specifically for B2B software companies executing on that. The other 300 million are widely not aware clay exists. And also the ones who know exists don't know how to use it, or they haven't done it 100 times. One thing that I've seen becoming top 5% in a specific segment is also about exposure and repetitions, like it is in sport. So once I had an amazing cold email in my inbox, and I wrote back to the founder. I actually published it anonymized on a LinkedIn post, and the founder commented, that wrote to me, is like, kudos to my outbound agency that wrote the email. And first of all, okay, I'm surprised that I was like, yeah, but then why not? Because the outbound agency can learn from doing this all day with multiple people, while the founder only has probably like 2 to 3 hours a week to do it if there's high amount of cold email subject matter expertise. So how do you see the state-of-the-art pipeline generation tactics being implemented more by agencies, more by people being 20 years in the field, or really by like engineers that become go-to-market engineers and just think about it in a very technical way and implement it with AI, with technology, and why?
Yeah, this ties again into the discussion we had earlier, right? I think you need to understand very precisely what is the problem you're solving and how you message that. How do you package that in a good message? That's one skill set. Whereas sourcing, enriching leads, setting up signal-based outbound, tinkering around with the different AI models and stuff like that is a different skill set. And doing both and learning both as a founder, as you ask for founders, I think it's not really feasible. So I see more and more the development of a role, a centralized role, or GTM engineer, or whatever you call it, right? Who has a great understanding of the problem you solve, the customers you serve, as well as can think around with tech and implement tech. Yeah, and typically this is not the 18-year-old kid, exceptions to the rules, right? Who bring the experience, understand very well what problem you solve, as well as you can implement tech. Yeah, and for the tech part, I think you can bring in agency very much, right? For the positioning, messaging, understanding of the problems you solve, you need to bring in a very good agency who can cover both things, and that's rare. So yeah.
I think spontaneous thought, yeah, I think it's something happening that's similar to MMA, mixed martial arts. Like UFC started 30 years ago, and there was just one guy doing boxing and one wrestling and one Brazilian jiu-jitsu and one taekwondo and one Thai boxing. And it was sufficient because most people only had one style, and it was sufficient to win. While the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy confused people because a boxer didn't know what to do on the ground, and every round starts on the feet, but if it goes to the ground, people were lost. And this is where it became interesting because it became multidisciplinary, right? When I started with pipeline generation, it was just take one tool, outbound email, 3 sequence works, rinse and repeat. And now it needs so many also difficult, but also different skill sets that it's multidisciplinary, right? And now some people ask me every training, like, why do you only do boxing? Like, well, because I managed to train like once a week, maybe twice, and I cannot cover 3 different sports in a level that is sufficient to succeed. So being top 5 to 10% in LinkedIn brand building, being top 5 to 10% in go-to-market engineering, signal-based outbound, probably already makes you top 1%. If you can combine that with like CRM expertise of like how it goes into what you discussed before in terms of warm leads, in terms of existing customers, in terms of referrals, in terms of lookalikes, in terms of those lost, and then actually sell and convert pipeline, the training issue you mentioned about, I mean, then you get from even top 10% in a discipline to top 0.1% by stacking skills. And I think that's something that's hugely underestimated out there, where people either go very wide and they do things that don't work anymore. They have a 2020 playbook for everything, versus they go very, very niche and say like, I just can do cold email. And then you ask like, so if somebody replies, what you gonna do? Like, I never sold a deal in my entire life. I don't know. Because it needs to be integrated go-to marketing. How do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And again, for some industries, you don't need any sophisticated stuff at all. Just coming off a call with a client where we did a cold calling campaign. So it was 50, like the top 50 installers of photovoltaic and heat pumps in Switzerland, typically 100 plus employees. We have a good value proposition. We reached out to 50, and he got a meeting, not closed deals, of course, but he got a meeting with 45%.
Yeah,
right.
That's crazy.
So, and this is only picking up the phone and dial and have somebody who's very good in doing that. it really depends again on your industry, on your go-to-market motion. And some industries, I mean, for example, it's super tough to do the same thing to chief HR officers, VP HR, right? They very often are not the budget holders. Plus, there are so many HR tools. They got so much cold outreach. It's super tough to get into there. The similar thing is with chief IT security officers. Very tough to crack. So it's very context specific. Yeah.
I agree, and that's what I meant with the future of go-to-market is already here, but it's not equally distributed, and it will take 6 months for AI to call you, and like then for iOS 26 function to say like, please state your name and intent, and then it shows it to the caller, and that's a book called Mana with one N, and like it ends up like an utopian scenario where like AI fixes everything and people just play all day, and the other is dystopian where the two AIs basically talk to each other and it's like you automatically, if you're 2 minutes late to work, one AI tells you like, if you're late again, I will flag your resume, and any AI that calls me to hire you, I will decline, so be on time. And by the way, I cut your salary by 30%. Like, well, if I quit, like, well, then I'm going to tell all the other AIs in your field that you're unhireable. And it creates this dystopian feel of like AIs managing humans. I had a similar experience at a client where we booked 6 calls within, I think, an hour. And we did briefing and debriefing in between. So I was like, wow, your ideal customer profile buyer personas are so friendly and so available and so well converting. And we actually called without big script. So like, hey, could we have a chat about buying an ERP software next week? Like, totally. How about Tuesday? Like, oh, cool. I said, if you do that to go to market people, if you do that to the typical B2B SaaS sales leaders, and you send them an email, quick question, call them like, yeah, not today, bye, we'll reach out. So it's a shorter, less converting conversation. So we could go on for hours for sure here, but one question that the last guest left with me for you is actually, what's one thing that very few people agree with you? When I asked him, it was like, he said like people. What is the people aspect that is most important in the future of go-to-market, and how do we make sure we pay enough attention to their motivation, intent, and success in our talent strategy?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind. The one we shortly touched, we touched up on both. A few years ago, I talked to a guy called Jamal Reimer, and he's a huge enterprise seller. I think he tens of millions sold tens of millions in large accounts, or specifically 1 or 2 large accounts. And before he went into enterprise sales, he was in transactional sales. Very short sales cycles, very transactional. And he was not good at it. He was not motivated. He fell into a slump. It was really detrimental to his professional career, self-esteem, and so on. And then he moved to enterprise sales. Different game. He was hugely successful. And I think, on the sales side, it's very important that you find the right people for the right sales motion, that they can be successful. And some people, they're more the transactional sellers, short term. Others, they sell consults for 1.5 years, 2 years, and then they close a huge deal. It's a different game, different underlying motivational drivers. And then the second thing is the challenge we discussed quickly with the customer success, right? That they also that you also get them to enjoy asking for a referral, asking for a testimonial, case study, whatever. Right. Yes, I think these are my 2 thoughts. It's super important, right? That you don't burn out talent, that they are in the role where they can be most successful.
Yeah.
And develop right over time.
What I learned across 6 years as an entrepreneur and before 10 years in go-to-market is you can change capabilities and capacity by giving people the right focus, time, and energy for that, and training and coaching them and leading them. You cannot change commitment and people. Again, it's hard to change identity. If somebody wants to visit a Taebo class and they want to do shadow boxing, it's very hard to get them into Thai box sparring and getting punched in the face if that's not what they want to do. You can help them get better at it. You can give them time back by saying, you can leave my class, you can go to the other class. But if that's not what they want, if they hate the cold, put them in on a snowboard. If you hate water, put them on a wakeboard. Bad idea on both happiness and success, probably. So thinking about this tradition, stole it from Stephen Bartlett from Diary of CEO. Thanks, Stephen, if you listen to this ever. What's one question I did not ask you, but that you would have liked to be asked and you would like to leave for the next guest?
Anything or specifically within go-to-market, pipeline
Specifically
generation?
about the future of go-to-market, but it doesn't need to be very techy as well.
Okay, it's a far shot, but do we have in future only AI selling to each other without the human involvement, yes or no, within the next 10 years? What's your guess?
My personal guess is no. The same way that we still have people dancing on a dance floor and not just driving an autonomous car somewhere because it's human. We have record numbers at races. We have record numbers of concert visits of human musicians, even if AI can do more error-free music, even if people can bike faster and grab an Uber, they still run, they still make music, they still dance.
Let me rephrase then. For which type of go-to-market motion AI will take over completely any conversation?
I will ask that and not spoil my take on it.
Okay.
Florian, thanks so much for sharing your deep thoughts around pipeline generation in the future, around the 4 ways to grow revenue, around new logo pipeline generation, converting pipeline to revenue, also growing your existing customer base and doing so efficiently. We talked a lot about how to leverage existing customer relationships, how to handle upselling, cross-selling, expansion to new departments, price increases, around relationship-based pipeline referrals, and so on, around closed loss resurrection rate was just not the right time. We also had a conversation that only about 5 to 10% of your target market is right now in market. So you cannot just tell them like buy now or never, but actually engage with them so you stay top of mind. And with that also comes the really key component to align your pipeline generation motion with your annual contract value, with your motion, if it's low touch, high touch, medium touch, whatever it might be, with your deal size mainly. And then also around what talent do you still need in terms of AI to not do the same jobs as 2020. So you will most likely have less people in the future. And you already mentioned as well that you would not mind being called by a highly knowledgeable AI that helps you solve your problem versus a junior SDR asking you questions you would like to answer as influencer. Thanks so much for sharing. All the best. Happy pipeline generation and talk soon.
Appreciate. Thanks for having me.